still happening. Well. So we're in this series, Christmas Not the Movies, and we went and we watched Home Alone the first week, which is a classic, which is a banger. Then Polar Express, which, full disclosure, I've never seen. And this week we're going to talk about one of my favorite movies. Now, in case you're here and you're wondering, like, well, this is church. Why are they talking about movies? Why are we going into this? This doesn't make any sense to me. So I want to talk to you about modern parables. All right? Parables is a story told to make a point, to teach you something about life. It draws on the experience of everyday life, draws upon the experience of all of our collective experiences in order to preach and make a point, a significant, profound point. Jesus was the king of parables. Jesus would often tell parables. He would often tell stories. He wouldn't just sit down and tell people, or he wouldn't just stand in front of people and be like, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. No, he would teach, and he'd use illustrations and stories. And so I believe truly and deeply that stories have a way of sticking with us and resonating with us more than anything else. I could tell you like 3 facts, 4 things to remember, but if I tell you a good story, that is what's really going to stick, and that's what's going to beg retelling. You know, you get a good story and you just tell it to every single person you ever meet. And so we're using these movies as modern parables to teach us something, to teach us not just like a life hack or a TED Talk point, but something profound and deeply biblical that we also see in the pages of Scripture. And so we're going to use a modern parable today. It's one of my, I don't know if I can call it my favorite Christmas movie, but it's definitely like in the top 3. And we're going to talk about How the Grinch Stole Christmas. But it's the best version. It's the Jim Carrey version. And let's give it up for Jim Carrey. Like, why not? Just why not? Everyone loves clapping. So this is the greatest, that's hard to say too, but it's one of the greatest comedic performances I've ever seen. My man kills it in this movie. And so in this movie, while it's a comedy, while we're going to laugh a lot, and honestly, I'm going to show you like a lot of the movie. We're going to see, while we're looking at funny stuff, we're also going to see bitterness, anger, and envy. That's what we're going to kind of talk about today. That's the subject we're going to broach. Bitterness, anger, and envy. And it's something that all of us have struggled with in the past, maybe are struggling with currently, and will struggle with in the future. Bitterness, anger, and envy. And specifically, these topics tethered to when people hurt us. Unfortunately, you're not going to get through life unscathed. You are going to be hurt. Someone's going to hurt you. We all have baggage that we're lugging around. And so a lot of times, instead of letting stuff go or just being like, hey, it's okay, we hold on to stuff and it festers and it kind of starts to rot and it leads to bitterness and anger and envy. And we see this in the Grinch. So here's what I want to do. I want to take you through the plot of The Grinch, and I want to show you guys kind of script and story development and narrative progression, and I want to show you character development and character progression, and we want to see kind of from beginning to the end of the movie, kind of the full arc narrative that The Grinch goes on in the movie. So I'm going to kind of chop up the plot from the movie, and we're going to kind of view this chronologically. So in the movie, we're given the background. It's probably, strangely, it's probably like in the first quarter of the movie, but you get the Grinch's background, you get a flashback scene, and it teaches you why the Grinch is this cantankerous, grumpy character, and why he hates the Who's so much. And so, let's show the first video clip, the background.
That day, he really got into the Christmas spirit for the first time. Perfect!
Sorry. Oh, snap.
Is everyone connected?
Merry Christmas, Uncle May.
Why do you have a bag on your head?
Probably because he's embarrassed by that Indiana's gift.
Mr. Grinch, please take the bag off. Yes, you take it off. Put the book down. And your foot.
Look at that hat job.
Wow. I've seen one of my siblings get mad about not getting what they wanted for Christmas, but never quite to that level. So we see the Grinch. My man is in his feels. He's feeling a certain kind of way about Christmas. He's angry because someone said some hurtful words to him. And then everyone starts to make fun of him because he's different. And it leads to this bitterness and this anger and this envy and this rage. He's got this bitterness because he's like, no, I don't like the Who's. I'm going to just harbor all this anger and resentment towards them. You see in his actions, his anger is expressed, it's demonstrative. And then you see this kind of low-key, subtle envy he has, that he's not like all the other Who's. And he's not like kind of on the ends with them, which isn't fully his fault, but he has this envy around that. And so he has these hurts and he has these wounds, much like many of us have. Maybe you've had a similar experience in life where you were wounded by someone's words. You were wounded by what someone said. I had this kid, check this out. I'm 32 years old. That's not the point I'm making, though that is shocking. 32 years old, and I still remember in preschool, something a kid said to me one time that was super hurtful. And I dragged that around for years. It hurt my self-esteem. Even to this day, I remember what that kid said. We all have stuff like that. Maybe it's something a friend said to you. Maybe it was a trusted friend and they stabbed you right in the back. Maybe it was a teacher who was like, oh, you're not going to amount to anything. Or well, you're probably not going to go to this college or be able to do this thing because you're probably not smart enough or qualified enough. Whatever it is, people can say some hurtful things. And so instead of embracing that, instead of responding to that and addressing the conflict, the Grinch just gives in to bitterness and anger and envy. And we talked about this actually the first week of the series when we watched Home Alone. A lot of times when there's a conflict, instead of addressing it, sometimes we just lash out. And then sometimes instead of addressing it, we just kind of back down. And so the Grinch kind of does both at the beginning. We'll see him take another response in the movie, but he just isolates himself on the top of this mountain, away from the people, and that's where the movie really picks up. But there's this girl named, who's the girl in the movie? Cindy Lou, that's right, Cindy Lou. And she is a kind and compassionate child. She's not fettered and weighed down with all of the social expectations of all the other Who's. And she sees the Grinch and has compassion for him. She wants him to be reconciled and belong to their community. She wants him to join everyone else. And she's kind of scratching her head because she's like, isn't Christmas the time we're extra kind to one another and extra accepting of one another? Why is he not part of anything? And so she nominates him to be part of this big jubilation and to be Mr. Christmas for that. And he's the most unlikely candidate, but what Cindy Lou hopes is that she can kind of reconcile the Grinch with all the other Who's. And so she's kind and she's compassionate, with Jesus-like qualities and tendencies. And so she's trying to talk the Grinch into rejoining, to letting go of his anger, or his bitterness, his anger and his envy, and rejoining all the other Who's. And so she goes up to the mountain, goes up to his house or lair, whatever you want to call it, and she has this interaction with him, trying to convince him to come down and join. Let's see the occasion.
The Grinches laugh! The impudent! The audacity! The unmitigated gall! You called out. Now get ready for the boom! Hey,
Mr. Grinch, my name is Cindy Lou.
you see, even now the terror is welling up inside you.
I'm not scared.
Then I didn't be expecting the face of your evil.
I don't think so.
Doubt? Another unmistakable sign of the heat babies. Now you're doomed.
Maybe we need a timeout.
Gets to there. So desensitized by movies and television.
And so she finally, like Grinch has to go like back and forth. He's like, do I join? Do I not join? Do I join? And finally, his dog kind of pushes him out the door and he goes to this holiday Jubilee thing. And he's going to attempt to rejoin all the other Who's. And again, he's having to suppress all of his bitterness and suppress all of his anger and suppress all of his envy. And he kind of like dips his toe in the waters of coming back. And he's really standoffish the whole time. He's trying to let go of this bitterness. But he's actually well received. Plot twist, he's really well received. And the people are celebrating him and they squire him around on this like chair and they're like, yeah. And he wears a special sweater and he gets this like laurel wreath and they're like, you're the king. And he has this moment of reconciliation. Now he hasn't addressed any of his bitterness. He hasn't addressed the ways in which he's been wronged by the Who's. But in this moment of excitement and joy, he's just like, this is amazing. But then the kid that he grew up with that was super hurtful to him, who was like, you're 8 years old and have a beard. That kid's the mayor now. And in order to kind of get our guy, the Grinch, in his feels and make him feel a certain kind of way about his past, he gives him as a gift like a face razor to remind him of this traumatic event he had as a kid. And when the Grinch sees it, like he just totally zones out. And because he didn't address the bitterness and he didn't address the anger and he didn't address the envy, it all comes flooding back. It all comes flooding back to him. And then he finds out that the girl he liked growing up is actually getting proposed to by the mayor, the kind of the bully, the one who hurt him the most. And so he's like, And so he starts going off. And here's what's interesting about the clip. The Grinch, again, doesn't deal with his bitterness, anger, and envy. And so it comes right back boiling to the surface. It just took one little thing to bring it right back. But then he starts to condemn the Who's for the way they handle Christmas, for the way they handle themselves, or the way they handle their community. And he makes some good points, actually. He's actually speaking truth. But here's the problem. Because of his bitterness and his anger and his envy, he judges them too harshly. And so this is the rant that he goes on after he's tried to reconcile.
That's what it's always been about. Yes. Yes. You want to know what happens to your kids? They all come to me. In your garbage. You see what I'm saying? In your garbage. I could hang myself with all the bad Christmas neckties I found at the house. The avarice never ends! I'm a golfer, I'm a diamond, I want a pony so I can ride it twice, get bored, and sell it to make glue! Look, I don't want to make waves, but this whole Christmas season is stupid! There is, however, one teeny tiny Christmas tradition I find quite meaningful.
there's this attempted reconciliation and it doesn't go well. Now again, it's really interesting because what the Grinch said is true. The Who's are all about materialism and greed, and they're so caught up in things that they're just like, presents and gifts. So he actually has a good, poignant social commentary, but it's not coming from a healthy place. It's coming from bitterness and anger and envy. And he actually judges too harshly. Now, in the Bible, in Matthew 7, Jesus actually preaches about this, and he talks about judging others. And it's okay for us to make judgments about things people do. That's wrong, that's right, that's a Jesus thing, that's not a Jesus thing. But we're not to judge too harshly or too severely. Jesus says in Matthew 7 that to the level you judge, you will be judged. And so my man the Grinch, his judgment is fueled by this bitterness and anger and envy. And so we see this attempted reconciliation and it doesn't go well. Because again, he didn't address his bitterness or his anger or his envy. So then we see, again, when there's conflict, you can either lash out, you can back out like he does when he lives on a mountain away from everyone. And that's where he starts the movie. But then he goes in and we see him lash out and we see the backlash of this attempted reconciliation going wrong. And so the backlash is the whole montage. For the sake of time, I decided not to show this one, but there's that whole song where he sings "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch," and he dresses up as Santa and he intends to steal all the Christmas gifts from the Who's. And again, it's all fueled by this past hurt. This thing that happened kind of just like one time, and these hurtful words that were spoken in this hurtful, traumatic situation. It's all fueled by that. And then this secondary situation where he thought, okay, maybe there's some healing here. Maybe they're being nice to me. And then he was, again, kind of traumatized, hurt, wounded. And so he acts out of that. He snatches up all the Christmas gifts, all the Christmas trees, all the food, and he makes off with it. And he's going to like push it off a cliff. And so he thinks he's succeeded. But really, his failure is two parts. He still hasn't addressed, I'm going to keep saying it, he still hasn't addressed his bitterness, his anger, and his envy. And he has misjudged the Who's. And one of the problems you get into in this movie is the Grinch takes one particular person, maybe even one small group of people, and he assumes that all the Who's are terrible, or all the Who's have hurt him. Well, not every single Who has hurt him. I feel like this is a Dr. Seuss book. Every single Who has hurt him. So that's hard to say. And so he's kind of misjudged things in two ways, two problems. And so he goes up to the top of the mountain, and he's expecting to hear tears. And he's like, I finally got the Who's. And then, to his surprise, he has this realization. We saw him go from seeing his background to seeing the occasion that incited the events of the movie to this attempted reconciliation. We see this backlash, this vengeance, and now we're going to see the Grinch comes to this shocking realization. Let's show it.
The tall and the small were singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came.
Our mother, they just the same.
And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling.
The shawl. It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, and bags.
And he puzzled and puzzled till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before.
Christmas.
He thought,
Don't come from the store. Merry Christmas. Perhaps.
So my man had like an ugly cry there for a minute because there's these years and years and years of bitterness stacked up that he just finally like let go. He even said, I'm feeling. It's like he allows himself to finally process that hurt, to finally process that bitterness and that anger and that envy. And it starts to kind of open up something inside of him. And so again, we talked about his two failures, not addressing the bitterness, anger and envy, and misjudging the who's. Well, finally he's letting himself feel those emotions over the bitterness, anger, and envy, and he realizes that he's misjudged the who's. He's probably on point with some of his condemnation of materialism and greed, probably on point with some of it, but not for all of them, and not to the extent that he judged them. And so he kind of backs down, and it kind of opens him up, and he has this slow, again, we don't see his character change quite yet, that's coming here in a second, but we see him start to kind of resolve some things, and he has this realization that, hey, I have to deal with this. I have to deal with this hurt and these feelings that I have surrounding it. But then we see the resolution of the movie. We do see that full character shift and change at the end. And we see him actually make a decision to not just like hide up in a mountain and just stay angry and bitter at everyone, but we see this decision on his part to actually engage with someone and to do something selfless for once and to kind of open himself up to love again. So let's see this rescue at the end. So my man's making gains there at the end, and he uses his strength to actually help the who's and to do something selfless and loving. And in doing so, he kind of opens himself up again. And he addresses all this stuff that's plagued him through the movies. And then he takes this like next step of courage and confidence, and he actually tries to save and then deliver all the toys back to the who's. And then at the end, you have all these other things transpire where he finally kind of faces his past and all of his wounds and all his bitterness. And he's like, okay, like I'm just gonna let that stuff go. I'm just gonna let that stuff go. He finally deals with it. He's felt the weight of his bitterness and anger and envy, and he's just kind of gone full circle. He's like, you know what? I'm not gonna hold on to that anymore. And he's received back. After this attempted reconciliation that went really bad, he's finally received back amongst the who's at the end of the movie. And this little girl that was the first person to show him any kind of kindness, the first person to truly see him, has this awesome moment with him as he rejoins the community. And this is how the movie ends.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Grinch. She was so...
I know. Harry.
No.
Greasy. Sticky. Do I present?
Warm.
how some of you guys sing when you don't know the words to the songs we're doing? That was you right there. So he has this full character resolution, and he's finally let go of the bitterness, anger, and envy, and he's finally received back into the community. So here's where I want to go with this. I'm giving you 3 questions to take to your groups. I'm going to give you some scriptures based on the second question, all right? So here's the first question I want you guys to go over in groups. I want this to be a good launching pad for good group discussion. So first question, let's throw it up there. What past hurts are you still holding on to? We all have something. We all have that thing someone said to us that we kind of let define us a little bit. Or that thing that happened to us that we kind of let set the pace and the tone for our life. Or that really hurtful event that maybe was completely out of our control that we somehow kind of use as an excuse for why we are the way we are. Well, I had this thing happen in my past, so that's why I'm this way. Well, that is fair that our past hurts and our wounds affect us presently and moving forward, but I think it's also incumbent upon us to address those things. So what are you holding on to from the past that you don't need to? Here's what I found. More often than not, the person that hurt you or the person that said that, they're not holding on to it as much as you are. And so in a way, I don't know, I've always kind of felt like I'm letting that person win. I don't think there's a win-lose thing, but like I let them win if I'm still upset about it. So I want you to talk to your crew in groups. I want you to talk to your group leader about this. What past hurts are you holding on to? And how is that shaping and defining you? Second question I want you to broach. Are you harboring any bitterness, anger, or envy right now? Right now. Like, what are you holding on to? Because here's the thing I've learned in life. That kind of bitterness, that kind of anger, that kind of envy is super unhealthy. Not only is it not what we're called to do as Jesus followers. We're not called to hold on to bitterness and anger and envy. We're called to forgive one another. We'll get to that here in a second. But it's not good for you. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your body to just internalize and hold on to all this. And one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Proverbs 14. Let's throw it up there. Verse 30. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Ugh. So the word for rots here, let's throw it up there. Rakav in Hebrew. It means rottenness and decay. It's often used to describe fruit that's gone bad or some kind of product that's gone bad. So you know, like when you're looking in your fridge and you get to the back and you're like, that stuff is growing stuff. Like the cream cheese is like growing a beard. Like this is disgusting looking. Microbiome in the back of your fridge. Like it's just rotted and decayed. And I think sometimes when we don't let go of our past hurts, it just like rots and festers. It's almost like a wound that you leave untreated that starts to get like infected. And like you can lose a limb from doing that. Even just like a little cut or laceration, if it goes untreated, you can like lose an arm over that junk. And so that's what bitterness does. It rots and decays. This is also used of dead, it's gross, but like of dead bodies in the Old Testament. It rots and decays, it rakavs. And so let's go back to the verse. And so it contrasts this to life. It actually says life to the body. This is how it's written in Hebrew. It says life to the body is the heart at. And it translates peace there, but here's the word actually in Hebrew. It's mirpah, and it's healing, cure, or health. So if you have this heart of peace, if you're letting things go and you're forgiving things, then you're going to have peace. But it's this kind of like holistic peace, like this healing, this health. It's healthy to address all of these things. And I tell people this all the time. Don't hold on to that junk. It's bad for your health. Let it go. That's not how God created us to live. That's not how Jesus is calling us to live. And if we listen, the Holy Spirit will stir our hearts and will speak to us and tell us what that thing is that we need to let go. Another verse I want to throw at you. This apostle Paul in the New Testament, he's talking about just the body, the church, right? And like sometimes you get in little conflicts or you got beef with people in church. And so Paul's writing to a specific group of people at this place called Ephesus. And this is what he writes as he's saying, hey, you're new, you're followers of Jesus now, you gotta act differently. He says this, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander. Brawling, people brawling in church. He's got a chair. Brawling and slander, along with every form of malice, like hatred. That's where the Grinch, he just posts up right in that first sentence. That's the Grinch through and through. Be kind and compassionate, like Cindy Lou was in the movie, to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. And we've talked about this a bajillion times. As we have been forgiven, we forgive others. So we got to let go of any bitterness that we're holding on to. It's causing division, and that's not what God had for us. He's called us to be, it says in 2 Corinthians 5, we were called to be ambassadors of reconciliation, bringing people back to God, leading people back to Jesus. Well, we can't do that if we're harboring bitterness and anger and malice and apparently brawling. And so we got to let that junk go. We got to get rid of the angerness and the anger, or the bitterness and the anger and the envy. And then lastly, in Hebrews, this is one of my all-time verses. I said that about Proverbs, but I think I just have a lot of favorite verses. Let's look at this one in Hebrews 12. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. So God gives us grace. How are we not going to have grace with other people? See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Don't let things fester. Don't let things build up. Don't let things accumulate over time. Honestly, you shouldn't get to a point in your relationships where you sit down with someone and go, okay, so there's just been this thing for, remember 3 years ago? Like 3 years is a long time. Or like, okay, so this thing happened when we were kids. You're like, when we were kids, why are you just saying something now? Why didn't we address this sooner? Don't let that stuff fester. Don't let that stuff build up. And so I want you to make an accurate assessment in your groups today. What are you holding on to? What are you harboring? What bitterness and anger and envy? Last question I want you to go over in groups. Let's throw it up there. Ooh, who do you need to reconcile with or forgive today? Again, those verses were explicit. Those verses were clear. We are to forgive one another as we have been forgiven. And so as you go to groups, I want you to contemplate these 3 questions, to talk them through, and to discuss them. And I know sometimes when you dig into this old stuff, it's hurtful. I told you, I can remember very specific things that specific people have said to me over the years that hurt me, that I have to make a conscientious decision to not influence me or how I live or who I am, and I got to block that junk out. I need to let them go. I need to forgive them. And here's another thing I want you guys to put on the table. A lot of times forgiveness is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. Or letting go of bitterness is not just a one-off. It's kind of a regular thing. It takes some time. You got to work it through. So as you go to your groups, I want you to work through these questions and figure out where the Lord is leading you in this. Let me pray for you guys. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for your goodness, your kindness, and your grace. And we recognize that goodness, kindness, and grace. We know that you see us in our suffering. You see us in our feeling isolated from community. You see us in our hurts. You see us in our tears. And so we thank you for that. And may we take that grace and kindness and compassion and mercy, and may we demonstrate that towards other people. And Jesus, we know we've been shown that grace and mercy, and central to following you is showing that kind of grace and compassion and mercy to others. And Lord, I know a lot of these students have people in their lives that have been really hurtful, and may you give them the wisdom and discernment to forgive and to reconcile, but also to guard and protect themselves, to allow maybe that healthy distance. And so just anoint the conversations that we have after this, and may we just grow in the grace and knowledge of you, that we may look more like you, Jesus, to a world that needs it. And we pray this in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, you guys go to groups, talk it out.